Have you ever noticed that the moment you stop explaining yourself, people start taking you more seriously? It's strange. When you try to clarify everything, justify every decision, and make sure everyone understands your intentions, something subtle happens. The more you explain, the less weight your words seem to carry. The more you try to be understood, the less authority you appear to have. But when you say less, when you resist the urge to defend, to elaborate, to convince, people begin to listen differently. They begin to watch you. They begin to assign meaning to your silence. This isn't accidental. It's behavioral psychology at work. Human beings are constantly interpreting signals. Not just what you say, but how much you say, how quickly you respond, and how hard you try to be accepted. When someone over-explains, the brain doesn't interpret that as clarity. It interprets it as uncertainty. Explanation, when it's excessive, looks like negotiation. And people rarely respect what appears to be negotiating for approval. Think about the individuals you've seen who naturally command respect. They don't rush to fill every silence. They don't issue long defenses of their choices. They don't interrupt disagreement with paragraphs of reasoning. They state what they mean, and then they stop. That pause, the absence of justification, is often read as confidence. Because confidence does not argue for its existence. When you constantly explain yourself, you unknowingly place other people in the position of judge. You signal that their validation is required for your actions to make sense. And once that dynamic is established, people begin to feel entitled to question, to probe, to doubt. Not because they are trying to challenge you, but because your behavior invited evaluation. On the other hand, when someone makes a decision and does not rush to defend it, the social dynamic shifts. The observer is no longer evaluating. They are interpreting. They start asking themselves, what does this person know that I do? The silence creates perceived depth. And the human mind has always associated restraint with authority. Throughout history, the individuals who spoke the least were often assumed to understand the most. Not because silence equals intelligence, but because people project meaning onto what they cannot easily read. Over-explaining removes that projection. It answers questions no one asked. It closes space that could have built intrigue or respect. In everyday life, this shows up in small moments. Someone questions your choice, and instead of answering simply, you add layers. You explain your reasoning, your background, your concerns, your intentions. You try to prevent misunderstanding before it even happens. But what others perceive is not thoughtfulness. They perceive discomfort. And discomfort, socially, lowers perceived status. People trust signals more than words. A calm decision with no defense feels intentional. A long explanation feels like repair work. This is why the person who says, "That's what I decided," and moves on often faces less resistance than the person who spends 5 minutes explaining why they decided it. The first communicates certainty. The second communicates persuasion. And persuasion, in social dynamics, suggests you are trying to win something. Respect is rarely given to those who appear to be trying to win it. There is also another layer to this. When you over-explain, you remove accountability from others. You make it easy for them to disengage because you've done all the interpretive work for them. You've handed them every answer, every justification, every emotional cue. But when you don't explain everything, people must engage more carefully. They must observe, they must consider, they must meet you halfway. Effort increases perceived value. This is why brief communication often feels more powerful than detailed communication. The brain assumes that if something is stated without effort, it must not require defense. We associate effortlessness with mastery. Consider how differently a message feels when someone says, "I can't attend," compared to when they say, "I'm really sorry, I wanted to come, but there's this situation and I wasn't sure what to do and I hope you understand." The longer version tries to preserve approval. The shorter version preserves position. One sounds like seeking permission. The other sounds like setting a boundary. And boundaries, calm, unspoken ones, are one of the strongest signals of self-respect humans recognize. None of this means silence should be used as a tactic. People can sense manipulation quickly. Forced quietness feels unnatural. The shift happens only when the need to be understood disappears. When you no longer feel responsible for managing everyone's perception of you, your communication changes automatically. You stop explaining not because you're trying to appear strong, but because you no longer feel the urgency to defend ordinary choices. That absence of urgency is what others notice. It suggests that your identity is not fragile. Many people believe respect comes from saying the right things. In reality, it often comes from not feeling the need to say too many things at all. Over-explaining is usually driven by fear of being misjudged. But the paradox is that trying to control judgment makes you appear more dependent on it. And dependence, even subtle, reduces influence. The individuals who hold social weight are not the ones who are always understood. They are the ones who are comfortable being occasionally misunderstood. Because they know that clarity is not the same as credibility. When you allow a pause instead of rushing to clarify, people begin adjusting to you instead of expecting you to adjust to them. That is where respect quietly forms, not in dramatic moments, but in repeated signals that you are not negotiating your place. There is also a psychological phenomenon known as cognitive completion. When information is missing, the brain works harder to fill the gap. And what people work to interpret, they tend to value more. By saying less, you allow others to invest attention. By explaining everything, you remove their investment. And without investment, there is rarely regard. Watch conversations carefully and you'll start noticing this pattern everywhere. The person who overanswers questions gets interrupted more. The person who responds briefly is rarely cut off. The one who elaborates is challenged. The one who states and pauses is considered. It's not about dominance. It's about perceived self-sufficiency. Humans instinctively respect those who appear internally settled. When you stop explaining every move, you communicate that your decisions are not performances. They are conclusions you've already reached. That changes how people approach you. They begin asking fewer probing questions. They begin assuming intention instead of doubting it. They begin treating your words as final rather than provisional. All without you demanding anything. Because respect that is signaled is stronger than respect that is requested. This is why, in many situations, the moment you no longer feel the need to convince others that you're right is the exact moment they begin to assume that you are. Not because you forced agreement, but because you removed the impression of uncertainty. And uncertainty, more than disagreement, is what weakens how people perceive us. So the shift is not about becoming quieter. It's about becoming comfortable enough with your own reasoning that you don't feel compelled to display it constantly. When that happens, your words become fewer but heavier. Your responses become shorter, but more deliberate. And people start listening, not because you spoke louder, but because you finally stopped trying to make sure they understood everything. Most people spend their lives trying to be fully explained. The ones who are taken seriously learn, eventually, that they don't need to be.